In the wake of World War II, the power dynamics between men and women began to shift. With the crumbling of Paris, French society was positioned for debate over the established roles of the sexes. Literary Paris became an avenue for this debate, and Simone de Beauvoir led the charge. Simone de Beauvoir's published work, including The Second Sex, as well as her public activism, stirred discussion for change in European society regarding the rights of women. The extensive efforts marked by her work sparked a second wave of feminism and laid the foundation for the modernization of the women's rights movement globally. Simone de Beauvoir had a difficult relationship with her parents growing up, one she delves into in her novel Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter. Her parents tried to censor what she read, but that only piqued her interest in these banned novels more, as she would read in secret. Growing up, de Beauvoir experienced frustration with the structure of religion and education, and as she attended Catholic schools, she became more and more disillusioned with the gender norms and inequality she perceived in the Catholic religion. She went to a prestigious French college, the Sorbonne, where she learned and developed her ability to debate. De Beauvoir worked as a teacher, and during this time, she was dismissed from multiple teaching posts because she spread feminist ideology to her students. After about 10 years of teaching, she moved into publishing works. Simone de Beauvoir's influential novels changed the course of history and sparked controversial debate. Her most notable, the 1949 The Second Sex, sparked Le Mouvement de Libération des Femmes in France, also known as the French Women's Liberation Movement. The novel discusses the systemic oppression of women, as women have always been treated as the other and the opposite of men. In this novel, she explores many topics, such as the eternal feminine, which claims that men and women are different at their cores, and that this cannot be changed throughout time or environment, motherhood, and societal standards for women versus men. The novel stimulated debate across France and around the world, inspiring and educating millions of men and women to champion women's rights.
Depuis le deuxième sexe, ce qui fait comme vous dites 25 ans, j'ai reçu énormément de lettres de femmes. Il y a des quantités de femmes qui se sont confiées à moi, plus ou moins longuement, mais enfin souvent avec pas mal de détails et même des correspondances qui se sont suivies.
In addition to her novels, de Beauvoir had an extensive background in public activism, most notably as one of the most influential leaders of the French women's liberation movement, saying that the movement is all about the right to manage our own bodies, the collectivization by the state of all social services currently provided for free by housewives, collective education of small children, and equality of work with no sex discrimination. The MLF was dedicated to educating and empowering women to take control of their lives and remain autonomous. The MLF strived for male exclusion, rejection of hierarchy and leadership, autonomy of its groups, and independence from political parties. The main diplomatic achievement was their fight for the legalization of abortions in France. Specifically, the MLF and de Beauvoir's fight for legal abortions was best displayed in the 1971 Manifesto of the 343. Written by de Beauvoir, the Manifesto of the 343 was a petition for the legalization of abortion in France. Simone de Beauvoir, alongside 342 famous French intellectuals, politicians, artists, and more, revealed in this piece that they had all received illegal abortions and were fighting for all French women's right to abortion. Many of the 343 women were ridiculed and slut-shamed by the media and the public, but had great impact on the feminist movement in France and for the eventual legalization of abortions. A second manifesto was written in 1973 with signatures from 331 doctors declaring their support for women's right to abortion. These doctors admitted to having provided illegal abortion safely and stated that we want freedom of abortion. It is entirely the woman's decision. We must reject any entity that forces her to defend herself, perpetuates an atmosphere of guilt, and allows underground abortions to persist. The Manifesto of the 343 also led to diplomacy, most notably with the French abortion law of 1975. This law was introduced by Simone Veil, the health minister of France at the time, and was passed on November 29th of 1974 by a vote of 284 to 189. The French abortion law of 1975 made it legal to receive and perform an abortion during the first 10 weeks of pregnancy, which was later extended to 12 weeks.
Simone de Beauvoir also created a feminist section in Les Temps Modernes, a modern journal she founded alongside her romantic partner, Jean-Paul Sartre. They met while studying at the Sorbonne together, and their relationship was extremely unconventional, even to modern standards. De Beauvoir and Sartre never got married, never lived together, or had children, but they met daily and shared a deep intellectual and emotional bond. In the 1981 novel A Farewell to Sartre, she wrote that this was her only major novel that was published without him reading it first. Many historians believe that she was the largest influence on Sartre's work as a philosopher, as his own opinions also influenced her works. She lived by her ideals even in her personal life, as she defined her own ideals of femininity and sexuality. She even rejected Sartre's proposal as she refused to follow the conventions of the Catholic Church.
In addition to writing the Manifesto of the 343, Simone de Beauvoir also served as a witness in the Bobigny trial.
Direct sur le plan du féminisme, à travers cette affaire de l'avortement
Oui.
que vous avez suivie depuis le début, et en particulier vous étiez témoin au procès de Bobigny, est-ce que justement on ne peut pas dire que c'est un peu le début, si nous regardons quelques années plus tard, le début du féminisme en France?
Certainement, c'est-à-dire que on pourrait dire en même temps qu'elles ont pris un très bon cheval de bataille, l'avortement, dans la mesure où elles commençaient à vouloir faire une femme aussi. On pensait que c'était à elles de prendre leurs affaires en main sans passer par des lois, par des décrets, ou arracher peut-être ces lois et ces décrets, mais enfin commencer à lutter dans des formes tout à fait neuves.
And now we are still fighting. 10 years after Simone de Beauvoir published The Second Sex, Betty Friedan, an American writer, wrote The Feminine Mystique, further pushing second-wave feminism in America. The novel was based upon many of the ideas that de Beauvoir discussed in her own works. Eva Hesse, a famous artist who was a member of a Jewish family that escaped Nazi Germany, wrote a series of diaries documenting her life, and she transcribed many passages from de Beauvoir which assisted her with her artistic projects. De Beauvoir is also thought to have influenced Kate Millett's 1969 novel titled Sexual Politics, as they were friends later on in de Beauvoir's life. Sexual Politics is often referenced alongside The Second Sex as an extremely influential novel of the feminist cause. However, despite de Beauvoir's large influence on second-wave feminism, she herself did not identify as a feminist and sometimes took to more compromising stances on the fight for women's rights. While she admitted the abortion law of the time was oppressive to women, she encouraged women not to fight it, but rather to embrace it as progress towards the full legalization of abortions.
De Beauvoir fought criticism and adversity throughout her lifetime, as many around the world criticized her for her politics and claimed her feminist ideas were too radical. Her television interview with Radio Canada was censored because her work was criticized by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Montreal. Her work continues to be banned from the Vatican today due to its discussion of atheism, existentialism, marriage, and sexuality.
Nevertheless, de Beauvoir's contributions to modern feminism and the progress towards an equal society are invaluable. In modern day, many writers, feminists, philosophers, and women in general look up to Simone de Beauvoir, her writing, and her activism.
This is a woman whose intellectual contribution to 20th century thought is just immense. I mean, The Second Sex shaped feminist movements around the world. Her own philosophy shaped existentialism. And I think that the story of her life has a lot to tell us about how women's lives are represented. And so it's still worth looking into the details.
The Second Sex continues to be discussed today in the context of the history of oppression of women and the role of women in modern society. In 2008, the 100th anniversary of de Beauvoir's death, the Simone de Beauvoir's Prize for Women's Freedom was created. The National Museum of Women in the Arts was the 2015 recipient of this award, and 2 years later, in 2017, they created a Simone de Beauvoir exhibit displaying de Beauvoir's desk area. Recently, the French Parliament approved a law extending the period to get abortions up to 14 weeks. Simone de Beauvoir is celebrated in modern society for all of her contributions. Countless biographies are written about de Beauvoir and her impact on second-wave feminism. Innumerable discussions are held on de Beauvoir's philosophy and existentialism, and her words continue to inspire women around the world today.